Hello, and welcome to the video which we will use to cover the subject of politics. For those of you who may feel offended by what you see here or hear here on this video or what you watch, please be assured that it was not intended to be written to offend you, but to inform. If your response is that you don't feel this to be an appropriate forum from which to hear such information, that is, information on politics, then you should consider this. Where else would you expect to hear the truth about this subject? It is a subject that is very important. It is relevant to everyone's everyday life, and it is important that you are aware of the facts behind it. It is assumed that you want to know the truth. Why else would you have watched this much of a video with the title of politics, or the preceding videos for that matter? It is hoped that you have not done so simply out of idle curiosity. The subject matter considered in this series of videos, and especially this particular subject, is generally of a very serious nature, and the speaker is not in the habit of arbitrarily expressing personal opinions. I am merely the instrument of delivering the information in these videos to the internet so that it will be available to all those who want to watch and listen to it. Trying to avoid offending anyone cannot be the foremost purpose of these videos. That purpose must be to tell the truth wherever it is needed, and indeed here it is needed. Nevertheless, the speaker has not tried to go out of the way to offend anyone. Still, there may be those with different mindsets who will be angered or offended by what they see and what they hear. There are, however, some subjects that must be looked at frankly, and this is such a subject. Writing about politics in today's world is not a happy task because of the degree to which so much of politics and so many politicians today have been perverted by greed. Greed for money and greed for power. There. It's been said. Quickly, cleanly, truthfully, and straight to the point. Far too many people in the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch of many of the so-called major world powers are so intent on furthering their own financial situation and power, or the financial situation and power of someone whom they feel can and will reward them, that they no longer truly represent the people of the society who elected them. Or, if they're appointed, then the people who elected those who appointed them. In many of the smaller or less powerful countries, the situation is often the same or worse. The loyalties of elected officials in virtually every country are all too often to their own political party, or to the organizations or corporations or individuals whose lobbyists have paid or otherwise influenced them. It saddens me to say that this is nothing more than legalized bribery, with those having the greatest resources with which to make such a legalized bribe generally having the greatest influence. The politicians accepting these funds must be somewhat careful so as not to arouse the ire of those whose votes they require in order to be re-elected. Nevertheless, it is sadly too often true that the attention span and the memory of the average voter is such that the politicians, as a general rule, don't feel the need to be overly cautious. There are from time to time a few politicians, or those from the ranks of political activists, who stand out as brilliant exceptions. Sadly, as few of these as there are, most of them don't last very long. If they're at all effective, they become potentially dangerous to the status quo, and they're then either ridiculed, scandalized, or in some other way more serious, discredited in an attempt to make them ineffective. If everything else fails, something worse may be done in order to neutralize them as a serious threat. If you truly believe otherwise, be careful that you don't fall in the category of those who are so naive or so apathetic that they don't pay any attention even to what is in the newspapers and news broadcasts. You need not be a person who doesn't know, or even worse, a person who doesn't care about the ever-growing millions of people all over the world who can't find a job that pays a living wage, or about the elderly who have to choose between medicine and food and paying the rent or winter heat bill. You don't need to be unaware of the masses of people who can't afford proper medical care, or who can't afford a decent education, or those individuals and even families with children who have no place to live, and they have become a part of the homeless population who try to exist on the streets or in their automobiles. Those who have lost their homes due to foreclosure or other reasons, and who are fortunate enough to have families that can and will take them in, are blessed to at least have a roof over their heads. But too many others, as I've stated here, are homeless. In addition, we mustn't forget about the millions of children around the world who go to sleep hungry every single night. In fact, if you're not a person who knows or cares about such things, I urge you to become such a person as soon as it's reasonably possible for you to do so. The worldwide financial crisis that began to manifest in the fall of 2008, and perhaps a little before that, has caused the loss of so many jobs and so many homes that millions upon millions have lost almost everything that they possessed, including their retirement. Your response may be that these are difficult problems and they can't be so easily solved by politicians. If you really believe that, it should be called to your attention that these same politicians seem to have been able to figure out easily how to provide excellent living quarters, food, clothing, medical insurance coverage, salary, retirement benefits, education, and transportation for themselves and their families. In addition, they've been able to keep, in some cases, for many years, in some cases too many years, the job that not only provides them with a generous expense account, but allows them to decide on the amount of all those benefits, including salary and retirement benefits for themselves. If they would only apply the same ingenuity and energy to solving these same problems for those who elected them and put their trust in them, you may rest assured that these problems could and would be solved. Perhaps other examples should also be pointed out. Consider the fact that a great many of the public schools in some countries have significant inequities in the quality of the education that's received by the students who attend certain schools, when that's compared to the education that's received by those students who attend other schools within the same general area or greater metropolitan area or region. Some countries, states, and provinces fund their schools by using property taxes from the properties in that community. It doesn't take a genius to realize that the property values in some of the inner city areas are often a great deal less than those in the surrounding suburban areas. The result is that some inner city schools are often severely underfunded compared to some of the suburban schools. And the amount available to teach these inner city youngsters, when considered on a per student basis, is much less than the amount available per student in the better funded suburban schools. That can only have in the long term one result. Those students that attend the underfunded schools are more likely to receive, and probably will receive, an education that is inferior to the education received by students attending the schools that have higher levels of funding. This country, and any country in any region, any city, state, or whatever, cannot afford to have people who receive an inferior education. Why not change the way that schools are funded so that every student in the state or province, or better yet, every student in the country, or better yet still, every student in the world, regardless of the location of the school, will have an education which has funding that has been brought up to the degree necessary so that it's equitable with the funding for all of the schools on the upper end of the funding spectrum for education. Why not do that? Change the educational system to pay the good teachers a salary that will cause other good people everywhere to seek to become teachers. After all, that's the most important position that any country has, is a position that teaches their children. They can then find other professions for the teachers whose students are found not to have been adequately prepared for their future lives. If necessary, change the educational system further to rid it of the sometimes burdensome bureaucracy that much too often prevents positive change. School curricula and policies should be uniform throughout the country, unfettered by any possible local prejudices or narrowness of thinking by some local officials. From time to time there is talk about taking steps to resolve these problems, yet they remain as you see them today. Have you ever wondered why? Consider yet another example. Why are so-called welfare or public aid programs often designed in such a way as to be self-perpetuating? That used to be the case in most countries. In some governments, they proudly point to time limits that have been established supposedly to solve that problem. And at the end of those time limits, those receiving aid under the program are dropped. Just dropped. At the same time, these programs, whether limited in duration or not, often make little or no provision for training that will allow workers, especially those who've lost their jobs in industries that are unlikely to rehire, to gain new skills that will help make them more employable. Additionally, why are there often no provisions for child care for those workers who need training or schooling in order to improve their situation sufficiently to avoid a continuing deepening dependency on welfare and public aid programs? Without being able to provide care for their children during training or at other times, many parents could not take advantage of training or schooling to improve their job skills, even if it were made available to them. Consider further why many of these programs are so underfunded that they cannot nearly help all of the students who are in need. When you consider also the fact that now many will be dropped from the aid programs after the specified time limit has been reached, regardless of whether adequate provision has been made to preserve the individual's ability to provide food, shelter, and medical care, even the basic essentials, for themselves or their families, it should cause you to wonder what kind of society it is in which you now live. Have you ever stopped to think about that? That should be especially true when certain political parties prefer to cut food subsistence programs for the poor and disabled rather than have even a small increase of taxes on the ultra-wealthy. What a sad state of affairs that is. Let us consider also the matter of a college education. Why are colleges and universities so expensive in some societies and countries? They're so costly to attend that for many who are well qualified, there may be very little, if any, hope of ever attaining the education they want so very much. Why not make an education available to every person who could benefit from it? How could society help but be uplifted? Does it make more sense to leave everyone to fend for themselves and then pay the much more expensive cost of prosecution and prison for those who were, for whatever reason, unable to compete, and maybe finally in desperation were driven to rob or steal in order to provide for themselves or their families? I think not. The option available to too many people today, the young people who want to attend college, is to get themselves in so much deeply in debt at high interest rates that they're likely to be years paying back the debt if they ever get it paid back. The answers to many of these questions make a sad commentary on our world today. Many informed people would be tempted to say that far too many societies in today's world seem much closer to being run like oligarchies than is reasonable for societies that are being described as true democracies. Note that if there is significant unemployment, then that creates great competition for jobs. Wages can be then lowered, Employees are afraid to complain or even ask for an increase in salary, unless they're among the very top executives who have, statistically, had the size of their salaries continue to increase far greater proportionally than that of their employees. If the corporate structure in most societies had its way, there would be an ongoing employer's market, to put it mildly. Although things may have changed somewhat since the worldwide financial crisis of 2008, why do you think that in earlier days the stock market has in times past, prior to the aforementioned financial crisis of 2008, the stock market often dropped when unemployment figures dropped? One would have thought that this would be good news. Note additionally that if there are large segments of the population who can be made to be perceived as too lazy to work, always wanting handouts on so-called welfare programs for generation after generation, then because of that perception, it's very easy to keep the rest of the population angry with that particular segment of society. That anger is less likely, therefore, to be directed toward those who actually control or strongly influence the society. And this doesn't necessarily refer only to the politicians. It helps those in power that respect also when those who are it helps those in power in that respect also when those who are working are not doing the work that 2 or 3 used to do because of downsizing, and they're therefore so busy and concerned about their own jobs and their own problems that they don't have time to think about what's really happening to their society or why it's happening. When people are well educated and well informed, however, it's not always so easy to manipulate their thinking and their opinions. Does it surprise you, therefore, that higher education is expensive and difficult for many to obtain? Are your eyes beginning to open just a little bit? I hope so. Once steps have been taken to correct these very serious problems, there might not be as much wealth or power to go around for all those who crave it. But those in the rest of the population will certainly be able to get by much better than they do today. If you're not familiar with the nature of far too many of the politicians of today, or anyone else with power, then start paying more attention to what they do instead of what they say. It could open your eyes even more. The systems of some of the world's governments have become so corrupt that those politicians who truly care about their society and the people in it too often either resign in disgust or refuse to run for re-election after discovering how futile it is to try to make decent reform, when those who will lose wealth and or power as a result of such reform are the same ones who are in control of the decision-making process. They're not going to give up that control. One additional point needs to be made here. Consistently over the years, there have been men who made so much wealth by investing in the stock market in a certain country that they're among the wealthiest men in that country. Maybe they're industrialists also. They're probably among the wealthiest men in the world. The individual people involved are not the issue. A society built around values that allows such scenarios, that is the issue. Many of these people made millions, and a few actually made billions over and above what they already had, just within a time period of a few years or so. Although more recent changes have reduced to a certain degree the holdings of some, the super wealthy are still just that, super wealthy, when compared to the rest of the population. Now, wealth that's been earned honestly from hard work and used wisely with thought for those beyond oneself need not necessarily be the cause for criticism. That's not the primary concern of the speaker at the time of this video. The problem rears its ugly head when those who have that kind of wealth are so greedy to hold on to it all, and I mean all, that they continue to put forth and insist upon tax proposals that will shift the tax burden from them to the average working family. And again, as I said, away from themselves. Certainly, currently they enjoy a comparatively low tax rate on major investment returns, capital gains, and they're not doing their fair share in carrying or even reasonably sharing the burden of supporting with taxes the very society from which they have gained so very much. 10, 20, 30 years ago, taxes were much higher than they are today. And those same people were still very super wealthy. Now, additionally, if you care to really understand the motives of those who demand tax cuts, just pay attention to the far greater percentage of reduction in the capital gains tax or the tax on dividends from stocks, both of which directly affect earnings made from the stock market. And reductions are very beneficial to those who make their millions there each year. When those reductions and percentages are compared to the much smaller percentage of reduction in the taxes on the wages of the average working family, you're going to find that the taxes that they pay on dividends and on capital gains is a far lesser percentage than that percentage that the average family pays on their wages. It's sad that these events take place all over the world, not just in one or two countries. Yet too often the wealthy respond with great cries of anguish. Soak the rich. All you want to do is soak the rich. Indeed, the rich have hardly been even slightly dampened, much less soaked, if you care to take a moment to examine their lifestyle, especially when compared to the lifestyle of the average poor or middle-income family. It's obvious that the wealthy do not always pay their fair share. After all, how many millions or billions does one need for a rainy day? Another statement often made when efforts are initiated to equalize the playing field to help working families is that this amounts to class warfare against the wealthy and ultra-wealthy. This is particularly galling when those who are aware of what is really happening know that the wealthy and ultra-wealthy have been very successfully, waging class warfare against working families and the poor for a very great many decades. If you doubt this, look at the ever-increasing income disparity between the rich and the average working family, and wage disparity, as the wealthy continue to have their income rise rapidly, while the wages of working families have actually effectively, considering inflation, dropped over the same period, a time from approximately 1970 to the 2013-2014 period of time, although this so-called war has been going on far longer than that time period, where they have waged class warfare on the working people. As an added note, you may also find it extremely interesting to be aware of the fact that there are those who consider to be very knowledgeable, who are saying that if incomes made during the years 2009 through 2012 went to the top of the population, the top's a very small percentage, is that the kind of justice and fairness that you were taught to believe in? Neither was I. How can anyone really believe that such things could be morally right when our societies have children all over the world who are going to sleep homeless and hungry every night? At the same time, there are some people who are so filled with greed that they don't want to have to do without even a few dollars of the many millions or even billions that they make year after year. While all of this is going on, the rest of us seem so filled with apathy or so caught up in our own troubles that almost nothing is really getting done to change these conditions. The conditions that are still causing these problems each and every day all over the world. What suffering would those ultra-wealthy people, some of whom are truly filled with great greed, endure if they had to live on a few million or a few billion less in profits this year, or any year when that is compared to the suffering day after day year after year, of so many children and adults of all ages. If you're a person who can easily justify such inequity to yourself, then you should take a long, hard look at your values and your priorities. Or in your next incarnation, you may very well be one of those homeless who go to sleep hungry every night. Think about that. Give it some very serious thought. Whether you agree or disagree with what has been stated here, you should be reminded that the law which says, "As you sow, so shall you reap," is a karmic law that applies not only to each of us as individuals, but to entire countries and societies and cultures. If the people of a society or a country allow the leaders of that society or country to oppress or even to ignore those who are unable to help themselves, and I mean the children, the elderly, the ill, the weak, the homeless, the jobless, those in poverty, and those without hope, then the people of that society who allow that to happen cannot escape the responsibility for their inaction. And they, as a society, will pay for the error of such apathy as certainly, if not as severely, as will those who are more directly responsible. Why do you think that it was said that the love of money is the root of all evil? Do you think he just put that out there and made it up out of his head? If you're not a believer in such things as karma as described here, then watch carefully what takes place in the world over the next few decades, maybe even the next decade or two. What do you think is being referred to in the video, in this series of videos that has been talking about the fact that the world has entered a long dark tunnel, meaning a time of great difficulty and strife? We, the people of this world, crossed the threshold of that tunnel on September 11th, 2001. This tunnel became even darker with the advent of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Long, long wars, followed by the worldwide financial crisis that began to manifest openly in the fall of 2008. There is also that which has been called the Arab Spring, along with natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy, along with global climate change and numerous other problems. I expect the ride through this tunnel to become even more difficult in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Be thankful that there is light waiting for us when we finally reach the end of that long, dark tunnel. Because of this serious matter of responsibility, the people of a society or country, and yes, even the people of the entire world, this planet, must insist that politics become the fine and noble profession that it was always intended to be. A profession which calls out to those selfless, dedicated individuals who deeply desire to have and to live and to serve in a society and in a country and in a world that puts the well-being of all its people first and foremost. Perhaps now you can understand why so very few people are willing to talk or write about such things. They would be quickly dismissed as radicals, when in fact they may simply be well-informed persons who want their society to fulfill its potential to serve all the people well, instead of just a very small percentage being well served. Such things are not easy to say, and they're not easy to listen to. But the time has come when the people of this world must open their eyes and ears, put apathy aside, and insist on real changes. Positive changes in their politics and in their politicians, in their society, even in their government if necessary, and yes, even in their entire planet, in order to avoid the alternative of continuing in the same devastating direction at the same devastating speed. If these positive changes are not begun soon, we may wait too long, and the damage being done to our minds and our hearts and our planet may become irreversible. We cannot afford to wait that long. If there are poor, or homeless, or hungry, or ill, or any persons in your society who are without hope, you and those around you would be very wise to give these problems tremendously serious consideration. Every possible attempt should be made to take whatever steps may be necessary to bring about a resolution to these matters. That is, if you believe in the truth of the universal karmic law that states, again, as you sow, so shall you reap. Otherwise, you and or your children, as well as the others in your society who do nothing to bring about needed change, will be paying off that karmic debt for a long, long time to come. In fact, payment has already begun, and before everything is resolved, there will be very few on this planet who will remain untouched. It is not the intention of this speaker to frighten anyone, but if the truth needs to be told, and it does, in order that many can prepare themselves, then it must be told regardless of how frightening or alarming it may be. If you are, or if you know, a person who may have a specific idea or ideas that you feel could be part of a reasonable and realistic approach to solving any one or more of the serious problems described in this video, then you're invited to share your thoughts with the speaker. Thoughtful and intelligent changes are needed. Some will have to be very far-reaching. These changes are coming, and they are cosmically inevitable. Perhaps your thoughts could become an instrument used by positive cosmic forces, and your ideas could help bring about one or more such changes. I will look forward to hearing your input. I now encourage you to watch the next video, which talks about the central purpose behind these institutions covered in these last few videos, as well as looking briefly on the major world religions. Thank you very much for watching.